Hi Tim, it's really good to see you again. I hope you've had a good week.
Hi Claire, all good here. Have had a good week and hope you have too. Now, I heard it was someone's birthday this week. Do you know who that was?
Tim, it was my birthday. Yeah, I did only have one candle on my birthday cake. So,
Um,
so children, you'll just have to guess how many there should have been. But there was only one this year, but it was lovely. I saw some friends, I had birthday cake, had lots of birthday cards, and I had some presents as well. It was a really, really great day. Yeah, so thank you for asking, Tim.
and a group of grown-ups from the church sang happy birthday to you on Zoom very badly, didn't we?
Yeah, they did. They did sing very badly. I'm glad it wasn't recorded, but you know, it was lovely to hear them sing happy birthday. So I'm sure children, you can sing happy birthday much better than the grown-ups, much more in tune.
Yeah, yeah. Shall we start then? We've got some pictures to show you, explorers, adventurers, and these are pictures that have been taken from space. So they've been taken from a space satellite, not by Claire or myself, by somebody on a space station. So a very, very, very long way away. And your challenge is to try and work out what they are. They're all famous landmarks in the world. You should have heard of some, if not most of them. Maybe get your parents in as well, because your parents probably should know most of them. And if you don't and they do, they can give you some clues. Now I'll give you some clues as well, and we'll see how far we get. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to take you to the first one in a minute. Here we go. Right, the first one is a fairly easy one, isn't it, Claire? If you look at that closely and look in the middle there, there's a big clue. What is that a picture of?
That's a picture, I think, Tim, because I can read the writing, of the Hollywood sign in America.
It is the Hollywood sign in America. So that was a fairly easy one to start us off. Now here is a much harder one. The clue in this one is to look at that fairly thick line that runs all the way down the middle of the screen, from the middle down to over to the right. Look at that line and see if you can work out what this one is.
I think that that might be the Great Wall of China.
It is the Great Wall of China, Claire. Well done. The third one is, I think this is a bit easier, don't you, Claire?
Yeah, I think so, because I think this one has something to do with the Bible stories that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. And I think there's a bit of a clue in the shape of those things in the middle of the picture. Is it the pyramids in Egypt?
It is the Egyptian pyramids. And the next one, which is really a bit of blue and light blue and white, where do you think this is? It's a very famous place in the world.
This is somewhere I think that I'd really, really like to go to. I'd have to get on a plane, wouldn't I, and travel on a plane for a long time.
You would.
Side of the world, and then get on a boat.
You would.
And then perhaps jump over the side of the boat in my diving kit. And
that's right.
It's the Great Barrier Reef.
It is the Great Barrier Reef, and hopefully quite a few adventurers and explorers got that one. It's the Great Barrier Reef. Now this is a tricky one, I think, adventurers and explorers. I'm going to give you a little bit of a clue and say, well, you might have already worked this out, but say that the white stuff, or the white marks there, are snow. So where do you think this is? A very famous place in the world. Probably none of us have been there.
Yeah, none of us have been there. I think for this one, I'd have to be very, very fit, and it would take me quite a long time to get there. And yeah, it might be a bit dangerous, I think, to get right to the very top. Is it Mount Everest?
It is Mount Everest. And the final one, I think, is the hardest one. I think this is a difficult one, Claire. So remember, it's taken a long, long way from Earth. The clue, or the part that probably might help you get this, is that wiggly thing that looks a little bit like a river. It's not a river, that starts down in the bottom left of your screen. It sort of works along the bottom, then goes up and up and up and up, and then it goes right and ends up more to the top right. If you follow that, you might just get it, but it is tricky. See if your mums and dads or whoever's with you, see if they can get this one if you can't.
I wonder, Tim, I know I've got a friend who's been to see this, and I've seen her photographs. It's an amazing place. This picture just doesn't give any clue of it. Is it the Grand Canyon, which is like really, really wide and really, really deep, and it's in America?
It is the Grand Canyon. I don't know how many of you explorers and adventurers got that, and if you did, well done. So we've just looked at 6 very famous places in the world, but we're starting a brand new series in Adventurers and Explorers, aren't we, Claire? And you probably don't know what the series is yet, but we looked at those satellite pictures because we don't always see the full picture of where our lives are going. We're talking about our lives here and the plans for our lives. But do you know what? God does. He has a plan for us, and he can see where we're going. A bit like he can see all of us, each of us in the whole world, and he can see all those famous places, not just on screen, but all at once and all the time. So this week is the first week of this new stories. We're going to look at a story that shows that God had a clear plan for a particular person, his brothers, and in fact, a whole big group of people. But unfortunately, a few bad things happened along the way. And in a minute, Claire, you're going to tell the story, aren't you?
Yep.
And then I'll come back and sort of look at the story and see what it means for us today.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I think it's a story that probably lots of you will have heard before, but we're going to challenge you to have a little bit of a think about what's going on, and just think about how we see God's plan working out in that story. So I'll see you in a minute, and then you'll see Tim again later on. So great. I think, Tim, are you going to say bye for now? And I'll say bye, and we'll see you again very soon.
Bye for now.
So as I've just said, we're just about to start a new series looking at the life of Joseph. And today we're going to be thinking about God's good plan for Joseph. So God had a good plan for Joseph. But as we listen to the story from the Bible, we're going to find out that actually sometimes it was really hard for Joseph to see what was going on. A bit like those pictures that we looked at in the quiz just a few minutes ago. It was really hard to see what was going on. But God's good plan was working out. But also Joseph's brothers had a plan for him too. So as you listen, see if you can work out what the brothers' plan was for Joseph. Now, Joseph belonged to a very special family. His great-grandfather was a man called Abraham. I've got a picture of him here. I'm just going to put it up. It's a little bit small. There's Abraham. And I think perhaps you can remember that God made some special promises to Abraham. Promises of a land, promises of a large family, and a promise that through Abraham's family, through his descendants, all people would get to enjoy God's blessing. And Abraham's family, well, it did grow. He and Sarah had a son called Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, one called Jacob and one through Esau. And it was through the younger son, Jacob, that God was going to keep his promises to Abraham, promises to bless the whole world. And Jacob had how many sons? Does anybody know? Jacob had 12 sons. Here we are. Here's a picture of the 12 sons. And one of those sons was Joseph. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. And in those days, if you wanted to show that somebody was your favourite son, what would you do is you'd have a special robe made for them. And that's exactly what Jacob did. He had a wonderful robe made so that when everybody saw Joseph wearing it, they would know that Joseph was his favourite son. Let's just stick the picture back up again. So Joseph was his favourite son, but just imagine how the other 11 brothers felt. Yeah, they were angry. They hated their brother. They didn't like him being their dad's favourite. But of course, God had a good plan for Joseph, for this loved son. And God wanted to make sure that Joseph and all his family knew what that plan was. And sometimes in the Bible we find, don't we, that if God wants to tell somebody something, he speaks to them in a dream. And that's what God did to Joseph. He gave Joseph 2 dreams. Here's a picture of the first dream. And in the first dream, there was a dream of 12 sheaves of corn that you'd find in a field. One of them was larger than the others, and the other 11 were bowing down and worshipping it. God's plan for Joseph was that he was going to be a ruler over his brothers. And the second dream that he gave, well, in this dream, there were 11 stars, but also the sun and moon, and all the stars and the sun and the moon bowed down to Joseph. It wasn't just his brothers that he was going to rule over, but his parents as well. Imagine what the brothers thought about that. At that point, they began to hate Joseph even more. So God's plan for Joseph was that he was God's chosen ruler. God had promised, hadn't he, that through Abraham, his family and then all the world would enjoy his blessing. And Joseph was going to be part of the plan to bring blessing to the whole world so that people could enjoy living with God as their king. But the brothers had a plan too. And their plan was to stop God's plan. They wanted to stop God's plan. They wanted to stop Joseph becoming ruler over them. Well, finally, their opportunity arose. The brothers were a long, long way from home. They were looking after their father's sheep in a place called Dothan. And Jacob sent Joseph to go and find his brothers and to see how they were getting on. Well, finally Joseph managed to track them down. And as he was walking towards them, the brothers spotted him. And they thought, brilliant, this is our ideal opportunity to carry out our plan. It was a terrible plan, a wicked plan, because they were plotting to kill him. And as he got close to them, well, they reached out, they grabbed him, they tore off that beautiful coat, and they threw him into a hole in the ground. And then they sat down and ate some food while they planned what they were going to do next. But as they sat down, Judah, one of the brothers, saw a caravan of camels and some traders. They were on their way to Egypt. Why don't we sell Joseph to them? Jacob suggested. Well, the brothers agreed with that plan. And so they sold him for money, not really very much money. They sold him to those traders who were on their way to Egypt. They didn't care that they might never see him again. They didn't care that he was going to end up in Egypt. And they didn't care that once he got to Egypt, he'd probably end up being sold as a slave. But they've got a problem. What were they going to tell their father Jacob when they got home? When they got home without Joseph? It's okay, they got a plan for that as well. They took the coat made of beautiful fabric and they tore it to look as if Joseph had been eaten and attacked by an animal. They put animal's blood on it so that there was no doubt what might have happened to Joseph. And then they went back home to see Jacob. We found this coat, Dad, they said. Look at it. Do you think it's Joseph's robe? Well, Jacob looked at the robe and he knew straight away that it was the coat he'd given to Joseph. It is my son's robe, he said. Some wild animal has eaten him. My son is dead. Jacob was so upset, and however hard his sons tried to comfort him, he was just so sad at the loss of his son, Joseph. Was what the brothers said true? No. For weeks and months and years, they didn't tell the truth about what they'd done. They didn't tell him that they'd sold their brother. They didn't tell him that their brother was now living miles and miles away in Egypt. No, they lied to their father about what they'd done to Joseph. So the brothers' plan for Joseph was to stop God's plan. And God's plan for Joseph was that Joseph would be God's chosen ruler. What is going to happen to God's plan? Because the chapter ends, Genesis 37 ends, with Joseph arriving in Egypt and he's been sold to a man called Potiphar, a very rich and a very important man. What will happen to God's plan? Have the brothers really stopped God's plan? Well, I'm going to hand back to Tim now, and he's going to help us to think a little bit more about that story and about what happened, and to see if God's plan for Joseph really has been stopped by his wicked brothers.
Hello again. Well, we've looked at some satellite pictures, which shows how God can see everything and he's got all these plans for all these people. We've heard the story from Claire, and now I'm going to look at really what this means for us today, what this story means for us. So I'm going to share something with you. And firstly, I'm going to look at the plans of the brothers, that's Joseph's brothers, and then the plans of God. So firstly, the plans of the brothers. Now, for Joseph, trouble is, those plans aren't very good, are they? They're a bit nasty. In fact, those brothers start off being a bit jealous of Joseph. Then it turns into them hating Joseph. And then they start talking about wanting to kill him. And as I'm sure you can all see, what they're doing is very wrong and actually really quite evil. But fortunately, God ensured that both Reuben and Judah did different things to mean that Joseph wasn't killed. He was put in that well, wasn't he, by the brothers? So rather than killing him, they put him in the well. And then, of course, they sold him to the Midianites, who then took him away. So let's look at God's plan for Joseph. Now, whilst we don't see the full plan this week in the story this week, what we do see, it's a far better one, and we'll see more of that in the weeks that follow. But we do see in this story, we do see God in action, and we can therefore say this is clearly God's plan. We see God giving Joseph a dream about how the other brothers will bow down to Joseph. And some of you who knows the story will know how that comes true later on. And then we see the second dream that God gives Joseph, where Joseph tells the brothers how the stars and the moon will all bow down to him. And then we see God in action, God effectively saving Joseph from being killed by being put in the well, and also saving him from being killed by being sold to the Midianites. And then a really important part of the story, which you may have seen at the end, we are told that Joseph is sold to Egypt, to Potiphar, who's in the royal officer of Pharaoh. Now, that's two types of plans. There was the brothers' plan for Joseph, wasn't a good one, and there's God's plan for Joseph, which we can see in the early parts. There's a great one forming, although we don't see the complete story. And God has a plan for us as well, each of us, and that is a great one as well. Now we know that God wants us in that plan to know Jesus. He wants us to be forgiven by Jesus. He wants us to follow Jesus. And he wants us to trust Jesus. And of course, with all this, we'd be in heaven with Jesus. But as we know, there's some difficult times along the way. For example, he doesn't say that everything will be perfect. Think of Joseph. There's a great plan for Joseph. Now, Joseph went through some very tough times, we saw in the passage today, didn't he? Some very nasty things happened. And we see nasty things happening to us, don't we? Or to people we know. For example, others we know or love might get really sick, might even be a sickness that means that they're threatened with dying. Bad things happen to us at school. It may be that certain people are nasty to us. God doesn't say in the Bible this won't happen. Someone might lose their job in your family or the people you live with, which means there's less money to buy things that you need. And then sometimes lots of bad things happen to lots of people at the same time. Look at coronavirus and look what's happening in the world today. And probably everybody can tell you something as bad has happened to them, to you, to our families because of coronavirus. So therefore, from this week, let's just remember these things. Going back to the satellite dishes right at the beginning, God sees all of these places and all the people in the world really clearly. He sees the whole world really clearly. He therefore sees each of us and each of our lives really clearly. And he has a plan for each of us, for you, for me, for everyone at St. Matthew's. But that doesn't mean there won't be tricky times along the way. And we just need to remember that and remember that he'll always be with us. So that's it this week. Claire and I hope you've enjoyed watching. We hope you've enjoyed listening. And we hope and pray that you've come to know God a little bit better by knowing that story. Goodbye.